Burr Stewart here with part 148 of my continuing series of model railroad operations videos. Today we're covering an operating session that we had with SoundRails in the Seattle region, and we ran trains through Bellingham, the Pacific Zip in both directions. We had a bad derailment, which we analyzed and discovered the problem that caused it. We ran a little diesel on the narrow gauge, including a very exciting shovel nose development, doubleheader. And we ran some steam on the standard gauge and even a little bit of passenger. So we got pretty much the full gamut. This was during the open house that we had after the op session. So let's get started. A whole bunch of people showed up for the operating session, and one of the first things we did was to run the Milwaukee Coast route train down from Bellingham to Seattle. By the way, if you wonder what I'm talking about, please check out the other videos on my channel that go into all these various geographies and so forth, and that's always a lot of fun. This is going over the Samish Bridge. And we switched out cars at the Lone Star Cement Plant in South Seattle. Tim Smith has been working on that model for a few months now. It's turning out great. And we ran a long freight train from Vancouver, BC down towards Portland. This was called the GWS, for Great Northern Western Pacific to Santa Fe. It was a train that ran all along the Pacific coast. That's a brand new car to my railroad, that orange car, which I'm very fond of, and I've got to find out what would have been shipped in it. Here it's going through downtown Seattle. Those ore cars are copper ore coming from British Columbia down to the smelter in Tacoma. There's a dispatcher keeping track of what all the trains are doing. And you can see a switcher there in the Stacy Street yard in the lower level, as well as this mainline freight coming into the yard and getting directions on which track to take.
What are you?
Things were going so well in the op session that one of my helpers, Scott Wiesman, decided to run the narrow gauge diesel that was up in the town of Opportunity. And we love running narrow gauge when we can, even though it wasn't part of the formal op session. That snow-covered building used to be on Tom Enlow's layout in Seattle. Tom was one of the founders of the OpSig and a real promoter of model railroad operations in the Seattle area for many years. Certainly inspired me. If you haven't heard of the OpSig, Operations Special Interest Group, I'll put a link to it in the description below, and I encourage you to check it out. You could say Scott is taking the opportunity to run a train through Opportunity. Opportunity really is a place in Idaho, right next to the Washington state border. My theory is that's where the White Pass and Yukon merged with the DNR-GW after a significant West Coast expansion that they did in the early 70s. That's my theory. Those narrow gauge cars look great. It almost looks like it's O-scale, but this is HOn3. Nice train, huh? Oops. And we were very happy to run the Pacific Zip again. This is train number 3, which was started by the Burlington Northern in the early years of the merger to run expedited piggyback service back and forth between Chicago and Seattle. Of course, these intermodal trains are ubiquitous now, but this was one of the very first experiments by a railroad to try to run a dedicated train. And they had an express boxcar in the rear, which you can see there.
Oh, okay. I can't see from here, but
Unfortunately, this express boxcar is a brass model which tends to derail on my hand-built curved crossing on the other side of this peninsula. And so what happened was that it caught on a switch and string-lined the entire train. This was after we had put some of it back together again, but mishaps do occur in an operating session. And there's not too much you can do about it except to clean up the mess and carry on. And I did an examination later to try to figure out why this happened. So here's the section of mainline that he was going across. And I'm pointing out the track that he was running on. And I think he had derailed back around that curve, and then he was dragging on the ground here and hit this unfortunately high pin that is involved in activating these switches. And normally this pin is out of the travel zone for car parts, but as you see, when it flips over to the left like that, it sticks up a little higher than the rail. It's just high enough to really catch on a piece of equipment. So I thought I'd just test that and see if my theory is right. See, I've got this caboose derailed, and look, it's just catching right on that thing because it's a little too high. And if I were to lower it, it would come out of the hole that is in the tie rod. So I think that's what happened. See, it just pokes right up there in the line of fire. It clears cars if they're on the track, but this was a derailment. So another train we ran was a northbound, I guess you'd call it a swig, Santa Fe, Western Pacific, and Great Northern. Came from California up to Vancouver, BC. And we can spend a little time looking at this and recognize that Northern Pacific car. We follow that in an earlier op session in one of my earlier videos. It's nice to see that back on the layout. See if you can see cars that really don't belong in the 1973 era here. But if it has a double COTS stencil panel like this CNW car here, it's a little too late for this era and I shouldn't be running it. As you know, if you've watched my other videos, I'm in the process of thinning out the freight car fleet a little bit to try to make it more realistic for 1973. It'll take us a while to get there. I think this Southern Pacific boxcar is okay. I think it is. And the log cars are fine. They did specialty logs like that root job there on the second log car. That I have prototypical photos of, so I know that's a realistic load, even though it looks really odd. You can hear the squealer's been doing a good job of making the wheel squeal noise this whole time, courtesy of the folks at Iowa Scaled Engineering. You can also see a lot of operators in the background there. It was a really good session. And a little later, we were able to run the partner of the Pacific Zip, which was train number 4. Pacific Zip was train number 3, and the eastbound version of it was train number 4. You can see it has its own express boxcar at the back, although we don't have the right trucks on that car. And it's heading into the Skycomb staging yard, which is as far east as we get on this railroad. You can notice there in the yard, there's a blue caboose on the end of a train which has already departed eastbound, if you will. And there's an engine staring at us that's westbound that we haven't run yet. But after 7.5 hours of operations, we didn't get that done. So we'll probably run that next week in a less formal session, and maybe you'll get to see that in a video too. Now, after the op session, we had an open house, as I mentioned, and that means we could get the continuous running loops going, which we don't normally use in an op session, but they're great for open houses. Here are 2 freights that were moving around 2 separate independent loops, and we got those F units back on a more appropriate freight train at this time. And Scott took this video because he was enjoying the whole thing so much.
So blues?
And he also is a blues bass player, so he enjoyed the conversation that we were having there with Paul DeLuca, who was a visitor from Omaha who joined us for the open house for a few minutes.
He's been in my basement. In Nebraska.
A blues cruise out of Seattle?
Yeah, he wants to go on that for sure. And then a little bit later, a friend brought over a Union Pacific Challenger steam engine with an extra tender and gave us a chance for a bang. Bang!
Okay. Yep.
Very nice. I got out all of my Santa Fe reefers from a drawer so that we would have something suitable to pull behind this Challenger. And of course, this has nothing to do with modeling Burlington Northern in the 1970s, but it's fun to run trains any chance you get, and especially interesting things like this Challenger.
Headed up a Sherman grade to the Coyote Pass.
That's right. Give me a horn blast. That's an impressive sounding whistle. Look at all that action. And I'm always fond of an S-curve on a train, so you can see that in the background. But look, here comes a passenger train pulled by an E unit. The passenger train is appropriate for 1973, even if the reefer block probably isn't. Now, I just had to go back and watch this little bit of S-curve since that's fun to see. We'll have another version of this coming up just a minute. Of course, it was switching over from one main to the other so that it would clear that passenger train. And then they went racing into town over bridge number 4, the Salmon Bay Bridge in Seattle. The thing that's bothering me about this is that there are no passengers in that green passenger car. That bother you too? I'll have to do something about that. Of course, it's also worth noting that these cars seem to have a layer of sawdust on the top because I haven't had a chance to clean them off since the remodel that we were doing. The construction put a layer of dust on the layout. We've vacuumed up all the track pretty well, but some of the cars and staging, like this passenger train, didn't get cleaned up. Oh, look at that. I took the crossover from the B track to the A track there in Interbay Yard, which is where we are now. And that's just a great scene. Of course, on the left is the engine facilities and that Alco C636, which we love to watch, along with some SD45s. Very good. We never did run the snowplow train during the op session. You can see the snowplow there on the right. We have a lot more trains ready to run than we have time for all the operators to get to them. I guess that's a good thing. Better than running out of trains anyway. So now our little race is going towards downtown Seattle. We get to enjoy the grade crossing bells brought to us by the folks at Iowa Scaled Engineering, ISE. There's Mount Rainier, as always, and the north portal of the tunnel underneath downtown Seattle.
Picks up a lot of speed going downhill.
It's great to have downtown back in service, even if it is just a backdrop photo or two. Oh, now the F units have made it up towards Skykomish once again. So we get to watch them in detail. Look at that. Nice detailing job there, Brian. A very appropriate box car and tank car and covered hopper. These ore cars are hauling limestone from Burlington. And there's that passenger train coming around again on that outer loop. With the empty passenger car. Boy, that's bugging me. We're going to have to do something about that. We really are. And there we go. Coming back around the corner, having passed the index loop. If you'd like a chance to see this layout in person, make plans to come to the National Model Railroad Association annual convention in 2027, which will be held in Tacoma, Washington, and will be one of the layouts holding open houses for that convention, as well as operating sessions. And I will put a link to that convention website in the description below. Here you get another good shot of that caboose that's already arrived, the blue caboose. And we love running those ore cars as well. So that was the open house, but I wanted to give you a chance to see some of the rolling stock progress we're making here. Brian is fixing up this shovel-nose diesel that came from the White Pass in Yukon, and I was joking before about the merger. Here the two companies merged, the DRGW and the WP&Y, and they're heading up towards Opportunity from the interchange yard at the Delta Yard in Everett. It's fun to see the reflections of light in a tunnel where there's a curve and a train coming. Here we go. Nice. That's a beautiful engine. Did you notice that front wheel was not on the track on that second unit? See that? That's not good. We may have to do some more work on that. Those are re-gauged Atlas trucks from an RSD 4.5 model. And they don't seem to be quite right. A little later, we ran back downhill, and this diesel seems to be doing just fine. That's code 55 rail on that trestle. Of course, it's gauged to HOn3 standards. And it's entering the town of Paradise. The red building is the Paradise Bar, named after a prototypical bar of the same name in the prototypical town of Paradise, Montana. Yeah, I think you're going to be seeing more pictures of this in the future as we get the engine fixed up. Notice the clickety-clack is 4-axle trucks instead of 6. We'll have to change that setting. It should be going click, 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 click. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and you'll look at my channel for many other videos with lots of varied equipment and interesting operational features. So for now, this is Burr Stewart, wishing you much fun with trains. And there's a little dynamic brake for you.
Might as well use them.
Yeah, I know. I've got a bajillion functions. It's like, here's the one that